development process. And then on Friday, I presented on the commercial case for community energy projects. And then finally, we've got Alex Schlick here today, who's going to lead us through procurement and governance options. So it's that final stage in the community energy project, kind of project journey. Next slide, please, Bruce. And so, our agenda today is similar to all the other sessions we've had. So as Alex said, try and go through these introductions a bit quicker than we have in the past, because many of you will have heard this before. And then Alex will present on governance and procurement before taking a 10-15 minute break. And then rather than a specific workshop activity, we've got a structured roundtable discussion, and that'll be hopefully a really helpful place where we can all share our past experiences, because obviously a lot of you represent community organisations that have been through particularly governance structures, and there'll be a lot of shared experience that I think can be helpful to other people on the call, and so that'll be an opportunity for us to ask questions of Alex, but also share our own experiences. Next, Reece. So yeah, maybe particularly for Alex's benefit, if we could go around the room, and if you could tell us who you are and kind of the organisation you're representing, and in particular what you're looking to get out of today's workshop. So looking down the list, maybe let's start with Andrew Beresford.
Yes, good morning everyone. My name is Andrew Beresford. I work for Community Action Northumberland. I'm just starting on a brand new project around climate action. Just returned from 2 weeks leave, so I don't actually know what that project's fully going to be delivering yet, but I work alongside my colleague Anna Revels, who's been on these workshops already, who kindly booked me into this. So in terms of what I want to get out of it, I've already had some good feedback from Anna there in terms of it's going to be useful. So I've got pretty much an open book there. The other project I work on is around reducing carbon in domestic properties as well. So a bit of retrofit, bit of domestic carbon reduction, and moving forwards into climate action.
Excellent, thanks Andrew, and welcome to the workshop.
Thank you.
Anna?
Good morning everyone. Yes, I think I know everybody, but yes, so Climate Action Officer for Cairn, climate action in rural North East, working with Andrew, and as I've said before, and he's just mentioned, new project, and we're just sort of trying to learn, because we will be hopefully supporting communities to go through this kind of process. Thank you.
Thanks Anna. Hilary Anderson. Hilary Anderson, are you able to unmute and introduce yourself? No, maybe she's just popped out. So let's move on to Ian Dickinson.
Good morning, everybody. As Ross said, my name's Ian Dickinson. I'm representing a group called Alwoodley Community Energy, based in North Leeds. We're just starting up. We've had 2 or 3 meetings. We've got lots of ideas, but we're not quite sure what to do and how to do it. So attended all these sessions last week and into this week, been very informative. But yeah, as I say, we're just starting up. We're fact finding our feet, wondering what to do, where to go next, and that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Leanne? Leanne Williams.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Am I here? Oh, I always faff about with these things. Yeah, sorry, I've got a background in environmental campaigning. I was working on food and energy for many years with Friends of the Earth. Kind of looking to get back involved with community energy. I was a director for Zero Carbon Yorkshire some time ago, and I helped a network of community and renewable energy projects across Yorkshire. Had a lot of health problems in the interim, coming back around again, trying to pick up on all these things and wanting to set up networks. And there's not as much going on in Hull and East Riding as there should be. and I'm wanting to encourage groups and help with people to set up projects. Yeah, so just need to do more in this area. So I'm pretty early on in the stages, but just really learned a lot from this workshop. It's been fantastic.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Thanks, Leanne. And Mark Hopley.
Good morning. Yeah, my name's Mark. I'm here wearing two hats this morning. I volunteer for a community benefit society, which is an organic farm in North Yorkshire, and we're currently looking at renewables there. However, I'm a director of a separate community benefit society, and we've got full planning permission now for a solar farm, and we're due to have a significant community share offer in 2025. And at the moment, we're encountering quite a lot of challenge around the risk that's related to raising community shares. So I'm really interested in the connection between governance and procurement and the conversations that we're going to have this morning. I'll be contributing as much as, receiving. So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, we welcome as much participation as possible, and should say at any point, if you want to raise a question during Alex's presentation or thereafter during our discussions, if you just kind of put the hand raise signal up on your screen, and we'll hopefully address any comments or questions. Maybe to introduce myself as well, and the other members of SEEN here. So I'm Ross. I've worked at SEEN for 2 years now, so I specialise more on the financial analysis and commercial side of projects. Over to Reese.
Thanks, Ross. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all again. Some familiar faces. For those who don't know, I'm Reese. I'm a consultant at SEEN's Liverpool office. I'm particularly interested in building energy modelling, particularly in terms of improving energy efficiency and energy performance in buildings. So a large part of my time is spent doing building audits, energy assessments to actually identify areas for building improvement, really. I'll pass to Alex next, who you've not met.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to meet you. So I'm Alex Lick. I'm director of SEEN Connect. I have been working in renewables for over 20 years, let's say. I trained as a landscape architect, and then I got involved heavily in landscape and visual impact assessments in the first round of kind of major onshore wind development. And then since 2014, been working exclusively for community energy projects, helping democratize the ownership of renewables through that process. Mark, I hope that we can have some productive conversations. We're just at the sort of final commissioning stages of a 2.5 megawatt community-owned solar farm that I first got involved in back in 2015. So not to I'm aware of some of the, having helped through the procurement governance side of things, and that's also a BENCOM. They're doing that finance shared through community share raise and so on. So yeah, I hope to kind of tailor the discussions to be as useful as possible, but I do appreciate, kind of what we've got on this call will be, kind of those from kind of very experienced with very specific needs and guidance, and those with kind of coming at this fresh. So we'll just try and keep the conversation flowing and make it as relevant to everyone as possible. But nice to meet everybody, and we can pass back to, wait, hold on, one other thing. Hilary, do you want to just introduce yourself now?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Hilary. I work for the Rural Design Centre in an innovation role. We're a small not-for-profit organisation which obviously champions the rural. We work with all local authorities and want to expand across the UK, hopefully. Currently working with Durham Community Action on a project to replicate community energy within Durham, following on from Community Can, where Anna works, the NCEL, Northumberland Community Energy Model. And we're also looking at EV charging opportunities within Teesdale at the moment as well. So I'm just here today. Again, the workshops have been really helpful, really helping us shape our ideas for the CEF fund. Thanks.
Thanks, Hilary. And yeah, so welcome everyone. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Reece, maybe go to the next slide. Sorry, Sue, I've completely forgotten about you. Sorry, I don't know how I rushed past that. Welcome, Sue.
Yeah, not to worry at all. No, it was just to say hello. I think I know most people here, but not everyone. So it was just to introduce myself as the Community Energy Development Officer for the North Eastern Yorkshire Net Zero Hub. So my role is supporting community energy groups and projects from initial idea, hopefully through development to investment ready stage. So it's very much about it's an engaging, signposting, introduction, providing information for groups, and also supporting groups applying to our funding pots, the current one of which is the Community Energy Fund. My background isn't in energy. It's in project management, project development, and supporting and working with groups and communities. So the hand-holding, and interesting that Alex is started as a landscape architect, because so did I. So, and that, I think that's probably about it for me.
Great, thanks very much, Sue. Sorry about that. Reece, if you could go on to the next slide. Yeah, so many of you will have heard about SEEN before at the other workshop, so I'll go through this quite briefly. Yeah, the bottom line is that SEEN are a community and local energy specialists. So working on a range of projects, whether that's kind of large-scale energy generation and the innovative side of kind of development models, or more recently we're doing much more and more kind of retrofit projects, looking at the energy efficiency of buildings. We operate as a social enterprise, which means that we invest back into community energy and also other technology solutions kind of across the world, kind of particularly in developing countries. And just to kind of take it a bit more personal, I think that is one of the reasons that I joined SEEN, is that our focus isn't narrowly on the technology solution, on delivering the kind of feasibility project or whatever the contract is that we're working on, but the scope is much wider. It's to look at how do you retain the benefits of energy within communities, and looking at not just kind of the financial benefit or the carbon benefit, but also those wider social benefits. So that's probably the thing to highlight. One of the reasons I'm working at SEEN and why I'm proud to work on these kind of projects. Next slide, please. Yeah, so especially early on, renewable energy development was probably made up the bulk of our projects. And that's on a range of technologies, whether wind, hydroelectric, solar PV. And as Alex said, we've got a recent example of this 2.6 megawatt solar array up in Dundee that the panels are being installed as we speak. So that's a very exciting project that's happening at the moment. And yeah, on renewable energy development, we provide support whether through options appraisals at the early stage, through to feasibility, and then to the operation and project management. And that's for community energy groups, for charities, for public bodies. So yeah, so it's a wide scope, and something we have expertise in. Reece, next slide. Yeah, so retrofit is an increasing focus, I think, throughout the UK. Kind of got quite an old and leaky housing stock, and there's more and more funding available now for community-led solutions to retrofit. So we do conduct these assessments, and Reece is an expert here on doing this for small businesses. So we regularly work on energy audits and looking at heat decarbonisation solutions such as heat networks. And then Alex is also leading on a software platform that we've developed, and that enables kind of a quick and in-depth look at the kind of energy picture of buildings that uses energy data such as EPCs, and then can deliver kind of quick solutions to the client. So that's the kind of on the more cutting edge work that we're doing on the software side. Next slide, please. Yes, the community energy sector has kind of moved away from these large scale schemes that export energy to the grid. And a lot of that's to do with the removal of the feed-in tariff policy. And the focus has switched now more to looking at local energy as a system. So looking at how do you match the supply potential, such as you've got the potential for a wind array or a solar farm, or you've got geothermal heat resource, but how can you actually match that to the local demand? And so we do a lot of work now looking at energy as this local energy system. And localizing also means that you retain the benefits within the community, because the end user is in the same location as the initial generator. So that means that we can retain those financial benefits and social benefits within the area. Next slide, please. Yeah, so move on to looking at the North Eastern Yorkshire Net Zero Hub. So this is the organisation that's funding this series of workshops. Next slide, please, Reece. Yeah, so I'll go through this quite briefly because I'm aware that many of you will have seen this a few times before. But the Net Zero Hubs, the North Eastern Yorkshire is one of 5 that are in England. It's funded by DESNZ, that great acronym, DESNZ, the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. And the focus here is really providing support to enable this locally focused approach to net zero. The organisations are focused on how can we support local organisations to make the net zero transition happen from locally rather than happening to communities, happening from within communities. And so that means attracting investment. It means increasing the pace of existing projects. It means developing programs. It means knowledge sharing. So there's a lot of examples out there that we can not only take inspiration from, but also take more detailed learnings from, like how did successful projects go through the stages. And then also raising local awareness. So we're aware that kind of community groups probably have limited bandwidth for the amount of projects they can pursue. So it's really important to lessen the barriers to encourage those projects to be community energy projects and really share what the benefits of those are. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are some of the ongoing projects of the hub. So obviously there was the Community Energy Fund, which I think is the focus of the next slide. Also helps provide a range of other supports, such as carbon literacy training, case studies, and then workshops like the one today. Next slide, please, Reece. Yes, the Community Energy Fund is quite a large scheme, and it can help advise that the hub, can help advise on the eligibility of projects for this. So the focus here is on community-based organisations and how can you get community-owned energy solutions. There are 2 stages of funding. Stage 1 is for initial feasibility studies, and stage 2 is for the business case. So and that can also involve a kind of more detailed surveying of the project needs. So the fund is really about lowering those initial barriers to starting the development of projects. So the Community Energy Fund can help with the initial investment and develop the feasibility of how you progress the project. And it's worth flagging that for the North Eastern Yorkshire, this fund is open until 13th of October. So we've got another month where applications are open. And yeah, so the hub can talk through the eligibility of any project you might have in mind and help you through that process. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we've already been introduced to Sue, but kind of these are 3 of the core energy team for North Eastern Yorkshire, and they should be your first point of call if you have any queries. Next slide, please, Reece. And there's also regional support. So a kind of range of faces and emails there, and you'll be sent through the slides, I think, at the end of the day for all of our workshops. So hopefully this can be a useful reference for you if you do need to follow up with the hub at all. Next slide, please. So this is a map of existing projects, community energy projects in North Eastern Yorkshire. It's worth highlighting that there's a bit of a lag because, as Alex said, typically projects can take some time to go through the pipeline. So that there may be more projects that come onto this map as they go online. But it's worth highlighting that the majority of projects are solar and in kind of rural areas and quite small scale. So there's definitely capacity in the North Eastern Yorkshire to increase the amount of community energy projects. There are probably less projects in this region than in others in the UK, but that means there's a real opportunity for community energy groups to really progress this and power on. Next slide, please. Yes, there's a range of current examples in the North East, and maybe here I'll just highlight what the range of what community energy can look like. So, for example, with the Derwent Valley, it's a car club, a community-owned car club, and they've got solar panels and charging points that's powered by community-owned energy. There's the Berwick Community Trust, where they've involved solar PV panels onto schools and a sports centre. Ascrig have done an options appraisal and have appointed local energy ambassadors to give kind of direct advice to the community. Circular Molten, they're looking at an anaerobic digester, which turns waste into biogas. And then finally, the Bishop Auckland Churches scheme. So that kind of brings churches together as kind of local organisations to look into feasibility studies of how they can decarbonise. So there you've got, just through these 5 examples, a range of types of community energy projects that we're seeing, whether that's car clubs, generation, feasibility studies and options appraisals, energy ambassadors focusing on more the retrofit side. So there's real kind of breadth that community energy can offer to a community in terms of the benefits. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's us caught up to the main part of the day, which is the presentation on governance and procurement. So the presentation will probably be around 30 minutes, but we encourage any questions that you might have as we go on. And then at around 10:30, we'll take a 15-minute break before continuing with a roundtable discussion. So with that, hand over to Alex. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ross. So apologies for starting with a kind of complicated slide, but the point of this is basically to give us a grounding in the general relationships and stakeholders that could potentially be involved in a project and the kinds of things that you need to be mapping out, probably in a simplified organogram, but to understand the appropriate governance and procurement arrangements for your project. Now, one of the challenges is that the community energy will face is that you may start, and we typically see this a lot. You might start as a subgroup, a steering group that might be, say, formed from a subgroup of a parish council, and then you have an idea, and at that point you're not constituted, but the parish council might be the sort of community entity that's able to sort of get some funding to allow you to kind of progress and work up a feasibility or something like that. But then your ambition and your kind of strategy of what you might want to do, may evolve over time. And so, part of what I want to explore today is thinking through the types of relationships that you might need to have as an organization, the kinds of procurement you might need, so that when you do decide to set up an entity, you have done that from an informed position so that that is flexible enough to meet your needs, specific enough to kind of be the best delivery vehicle for what you're trying to achieve. So just to kind of explain this diagram, we have the community entity at the top, and as I said, the entity that will have relationships with, on the one hand with the funders, and that could be the likes of the Net Zero Hub, but in due course, it could be with shareholders, it could be with trade-off bank or other lending institutions, and so on. And so there needs to be a kind of understanding of the financial relationships on the one hand, and then you have the end users at the other side, where whoever will be using the energy services that you're providing, and or indeed like sort of you'll have a contractual relationship, so potentially the landowner or the roof owner or so on. So these are people that you'll need to have lease agreements or development agreements or supply agreements with, and so on. In the middle, there's this word ESCO, and apologies if people are familiar with this, but this is a kind of umbrella term for an energy services company. Some entity that actually is responsible for providing the energy services and operating them for the purposes that you have. So the ESCO may well be the same entity as the community entity, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a separate entity. So, you know, it has a box there. And then at the bottom, we've got identified the potential contractors that you might have, and that's not all of them that you might enter into contractual relationships, but they might be the main ones at the operational phase of a project, where you might have a construction contractor. Well, you will have who will be responsible for sort of the potentially the design, the construction of the system. You have a operation and maintenance contractor, the O&M, to manage the asset on your behalf, and then potentially a contractor that provides metering and billing services depending on the type of service, the service that you're providing. So there are clearly like a number of key stakeholders with which the community entity will need to have contractual relationships with, and that's what we want to explore today to understand, okay, how does that influence governance decisions? How does that influence procurement? Okay, next slide, please. The other aspect that I think is kind of really important to understand right from the outset is the scope of the energy services you're providing. You know, we've heard from the participants today, you know, Andrew doing domestic retrofit, and we've got Mark who's developing a solar farm. You know, you've got EV charging facilities that are being provided. Energy services that the ESCO could be providing can be quite broad. The diagram here kind of explains in a schematic the different domains in which the energy services fall. So you've got at the far left, you've got the energy utility domain. So it's like the actual production of the energy, so the generation of the electricity, the heat. You've got the distribution, so that's the actual moving of the electricity or the heat from where it's generated to where it's needed. You've got the supply side of that, the metering and billing, and then the balance, the imbalance settlement. So that's the difference between kind of the demand that's met and the generation that's provided. And then there's also a further category, which is like energy services. So it may be that you're not selling electricity directly, but you're selling charging for a vehicle, or you're not selling you're selling warmth rather than kilowatt hours of heat, or that's where services becomes like the concept that needs to be considered here, rather than just the units of power, so to speak. Next slide. So then you need to think about ownership structures, and the diagram here is one of these ones that's been kind of prepared. I think it was by Bayes, but it's been around for a long time. It basically kind of shows in a very clear linear arrangement the relationship between control and risk. And at the far left, you've got total control, but all the risks sitting with you. And at the far end, other end, you have the partner taking on all the risk, but with that, you have very limited control. And there are various options in between, which are possible or necessary. So it might be that as a community, you really want to take on all of the ownership and all of the risk, but it might be that certain key stakeholders in the process, like the funder, won't support that and need a partner involved who's got other credentials or their track record or something that allow you to get through the process. So there's always a balance that needs to be understood between control and risk, and where you as a community entity sort of feel comfortable sitting within that, and also which partners you can bring on board to support your journey. Next slide. So I probably don't need to, but I mean, just to say that we're not providing legal advice here. We're just providing an overview, but effectively there's two main principles to start with in terms of you're thinking about like the entity, and like that you don't need to decide on, but even at the feasibility stage, when you're just assessing initial viability, are material to the considerations because of the ramifications on the financial modeling. So on the one hand, you've got a charity. On the other hand, you've got a for-profit company. Now, sometimes in the community sector, the idea of a for-profit can come across as a kind of bad word, but it doesn't need to be. It can be not for private profit, but still be operating in governance terms as a for-profit company. The profit could be sort of ring-fenced and put towards community benefit. So it's just about understanding it as a legal structure. And there are benefits to the charity setting up as a charity in terms of the tax reliefs that you get on it, but there are also restrictions to that approach, because it can be difficult to, or you can need, you can have less access to sort of the full range of financial support, funding support through that, and it can be difficult if you ever choose to exit, because if it's wrapped up in the charitable objects, then you can that can create problems as well. Now, you might think, oh well, if it's a community-owned project, would you ever want to exit? But say, for example, let's take Mark's solar farm. They build a 2 megawatt solar farm, and then they get an opportunity to build a 10 megawatt solar farm, but they can't finance the 10 megawatt one without sort of selling the first one, then there might be there might always be like sort of bigger opportunities that come from having exit strategies available. So it's just to kind of be aware of these things and think them through, and also understand the types of professional services you might need in terms of your kind of tax advice or accountancy will be different depending on which legal structure you take as an organization. Next slide. So just a sample of some community governance models, and I don't really want to dwell on this too much. I think I'd rather have people share their own their details of their own organizations, and perhaps some rationale as to why they selected that particular governance structure for themselves. We've heard Mark's got 2 hats, with both of them BENCOMs, so community benefit societies, and they're governed and guided by the Financial Conduct Authority. So there are certain rules around that. There's pool cooperatives, so registered societies, which are have specific requirements to them. Like, for example, a co-op is expected to actually trade with its members, so it's not necessarily appropriate vehicle for something like just developing a solar farm where the energy might be sold to the grid or to a particular off-taker. That electricity wouldn't go to individual members, so there would be no trading with members. There's the community land trust model, where that's often used for community delivery models more associated with conventional types of development, like affordable housing or community halls or built environment. And then, you know, there are community interest companies, which are designed either to trade for a social purpose or to carry out activities with a sort of wider community benefit, and so on. So that's not an exhaustive list, but it's perhaps the main ones that you might come across.
Alex, can I jump in? We've got a question coming from in the comments from Ian Dickinson, asking, are there any benefits or drawbacks of being a company limited by guarantee compared to a CDS?
So I don't really want to get in. I mean, there are and there aren't. I mean, I mean, part of the reason there are a number of different governance structures is because there are benefits and disbenefits to each one. And one of the things as a community energy leader is that you need to understand that if you end up as a director on a community benefit society or a director of a limited company, that there will be responsibilities that you have as a director that are legal responsibilities that have quite serious consequences if you fail to keep them. So there are aspects of governance structures which affect the liabilities and responsibilities that you have as director, and then there are others that affect the rules around how you can raise money and how you can distribute money and so on. So let's get into the detail of the different merits once we get into a group discussion and see if there are any shared experiences that the group has over what works, what's good and what's not good for their particular situation. So sorry, just looking at the message there from Sue. It might be useful to quickly go through the benefits and disbenefits. Sure, so we can do that. Let me come back to that, because I just wanted to give a quick overview of the topic, and then I can come and discuss the detail. So just want to touch on procurement briefly, and then we can come back to this, and that will tee us up for the sort of group discussion after the break. So next slide, Reese. So if we start thinking about procurement, I think the questions is like, first question you need to ask yourself is what are you procuring? So there are increasing levels of complexity as you progress along a project roadmap. So you might start with a feasibility equivalent to the Community Energy Fund stage 1 of a project, where what you're procuring is a consultancy. And you might do that through writing a 3 or 4 page project brief that says, we have an idea as a community that we want to explore heat in our village. You know, we'd like it to meet these requirements. We have this budget, and then that gets sent out to various consultants, and then they can prepare a proposal based on that. You move into more advanced stages of the development process, and you can't rely on necessarily a single consultancy to provide all the services required. You might need a full project team with legal services, specialist consultancy services as well, quantity surveyor services to look after financials, all of those kinds of things. But by that stage, you'll already have a feasibility which will have set out, and you'll have a more developed understanding of what it is that you're trying to do. And then as you move into the construction stage, you need to be like defining quite clearly what the contractor is building, what they're responsible for, what they're not responsible for, and also thinking about whether you need to have specialist contract management support in place, like a project manager or a project supervisor or a quantity surveyor to look after the cost side of things, depending on what capacity and capabilities you have within your group. And I think the most important thing on procurement is that is paramount, is that the process should be fair and transparent. Now, that's not just reflecting kind of values that you'd want to see deployed in the as a community energy organization, but it's like being fair to the people who you're inviting to tender, and certain aspects of procurement, like involving public partners, it would be a legal requirement that it's fair and transparent, and so you should adopt like good principles from the outset. So how do you actually go about doing that? Well, Reese, can you just put the next slide on, please? So the way to make sure that your process is fair and transparent is to set it out in the procurement documents, and part of that is to set out kind of how you're going to make the assessment, how you're going to pick your supplier, and always that will come down to a question of balancing price and quality. And you can apply your own selection criteria and your own weighting to suit your own particular needs. So with price, what you need to make sure is that you're able through the procurement process to compare like with like. So it's if you put a loose brief out and you get 2 returns, and one's for £5,000 and one's for £15,000, well, it can be quite hard to compare what you're getting, because you might be paying more, but you may be getting more for that. The other things to think about in terms of price is not just the overall cost, but what's the payment schedule? Like, so what's the timing of payments? Does that add to administrative burdens for you? Does it increase risk? Is there a requirement for upfront payments, you know, in advance of so on a construction phase, the contractor might look for upfront payment to cover their own purchase of equipment. So you need to think through the payment schedule, and also the payment terms can be quite important for a community entity which doesn't have its own funds in place. So you might, as an entity, like be dependent on the funder, and therefore you got an invoice from a supplier. You then have to process a claim to the funder. The funder needs to pay your claim before you can then pay out that supplier. Now, if the supplier's payment terms mean that they've got punitive penalties on top of, you know, if you don't meet their payment terms, then that can be a cost that falls to the community entity that wouldn't be covered by your funder. So these are the things to consider under price. Under quality, you've got a lot more what sort of flexibility to tailor it to your own specific requirements and your own specific priorities. So at Scene, we've done work with island communities, and their issues of local supply chains became very important, because it was like, okay, how do we support the businesses that operate in our local area? That becomes like a key thing. If you're in a larger metropolitan area, then supply chains are probably less critical, because there are lots of suppliers out there. So these are the things that can be weighted to meet your own particular requirements. But you know, in terms of defining selection criteria, there are typically these kind of 4 categories that are listed in the bullets. There's, you know, making sure that the supplier's got the capability, they've got the experience, they demonstrate through their approach that they know what they're doing, how they're going to manage the project, and then, you know, the ancillaries, the sort of benefits that it has in terms of, you know, kind of your own values, you know, be that fair work practices or community benefits or similar. So the final slide that I'm going to touch on today, and if you can just move on to the next one, Reese, is sort of following on from that process of like, how do you make sure that the process is fair and transparent? Well, you do that by structuring it and keeping a record. So in terms of the process, you'll put the brief out, you'll provide the opportunity for clarifications, but then when you get the submissions, you'll need to do both a quality review and then the kind of technical review, making sure that, you know, kind of what's being submitted. At that point, you can make clarifications of, you know, making sure you properly understand what's been done. If there are any mistakes that you pick up, give the opportunity for the supplier to actually like sort of clarify what they actually meant by those. Then having a system for reviewing and scoring the submissions, kind of individually from the different panel members that will be looking through it, and then coming together as a panel to sort of compare your assessments and discuss any points of that you found were particularly good, or raising any concerns that you have with parts of the submission, so that you kind of as a group identify, okay, you used your sort of scoring order of the different suppliers, and that process might give you a clear winner, but it might then mean that you've got a kind of further decision-making process to take place. So you might want to invite your preferred bidders to an interview, and then you've got this sort of formal processes that follow thereafter, where you can notify the preferred bidder and actually undertake some due diligence and enter negotiations in terms of the type of contract and final price, and notify unsuccessful bidders of outcome, and ideally provide them with some feedback. And as a supplier ourselves, so we've been on both sides of this process, both supporting community energy groups with the procurement, but also tendering for work at the sort of feasibility project management stages. And procurement takes a lot of time and effort. And so if you're if you're unsuccessful, you don't get paid for any of that. But what you can benefit from is if you get feedback from it and understand, okay, where it was you fell short, so that you can improve for the next time. Now, all of that perhaps sounds like quite a lot of work, but it is, but it's important, particularly at the construction stages, to make sure that you're picking a company that you can work with, because ultimately you might be working with this company for 1 or a year or more, and having a good working relationship with them is really important. It's like picking a business partner. You don't want to be working with someone who you can get along with. So these are things that need to be considered in the process. So that's the general overview of the governance and procurement. Why don't we take a break now, and then we can come back and have the roundtable discussion, and maybe I can kick that off by talking about some of the kind of initial benefits and disbenefits of different that will then give a sort of a framework for other people to sort of contribute to, if that sounds okay. But maybe just before we break, if there are any burning questions, which are at the top of your head, then we could just answer them first. No, okay, fine. So should we come back at 10:45? Good.
Yes, or earlier.
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, then 10:40. Good. Okay, so we'll see everyone back at 10:40, and then we can have the roundtable discussion.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. See you all in 10-15 minutes.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, good to meet you. Good to meet you. Yeah, the reason I just suggested doing the pros and cons is that that seems to be more of a question that's coming up at the moment because we've got early stage groups. You know, what are considerations for how we should set up, rather than at the moment procurement questions, I guess, because they're newer groups and they're doing the development ideas feasibility stage. So that would be brilliant to quick gallop through.
Sure.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope got your teas or coffees on the go and ready for a hopefully helpful roundtable discussion. Alex, not sure whether you want to kick off on going through some of the governance models in a bit more detail.
Sure. So let's wait, Mark. I might ask if Mark's broadband can hold up. I might ask Mark just to like introduce the BenCom bit, and because personally I find talking about KICs and CLTs and BenComs and co-ops in the abstract is quite dry, and I'd quite like to you know, discuss it by reference to specific case studies, and rather than drawing on ones that we've worked on, which we can, but ideally like sort of pick up experiences within the group. So Mark, are you there?
Yeah.
So you've got two BenComs. One's an organic farm, and the other one's working on a solar project. So you clearly kind of aware of the BenCom structure and so on. So maybe you just share with the group a bit more about that BenCom structure and why you feel that it's a good vehicle for your own activities.
Okay, so one BenCom, the organic farm, is 24 years old. It was previously an industrial providence society and converted. And the second, the solar farm, is I think about 18 months old. And in the case of the solar farm, it was chosen as the appropriate legal form for the progression of the solar farm. The solar farm has been 4 years of development to date, so it's a very patient process, but during that journey we decided that having democratic ownership was very important for the broadest range of local people, groups, organisations and businesses to have a stake in the solar farm. But we also were very conscious that we wanted to be able to raise finance, and so the BenCom structure allows us to raise some of the finance through the issue of community shares, and to enable us through the preparation of a community share process to really promote beyond existing activities the value of investing and becoming involved in the development of a solar farm.
Okay, thanks for that. And have you found that there are any restrictions from the BENCOM operation?
Not today. We've managed to access funds, but the changes around the CEF have been quite frustrating. But I don't think this is the place to go into that. We've previously received rural CEF, and now we've received CEF 1, and we're currently in the application process for CEF 2. So those are the only frustrations to date. There are some funds that we recognise we're not in a strong position to go for, because we're quite clearly for profit, but yeah.
Okay. No, that's helpful. I mean, rather than it just me asking questions, it's just like an opportunity for a round table discussions. Like, Sue, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, it was just to confirm, Mark, am I right in thinking your CEF application, because you're on the frontiers, your CEF application has been to the Northwest hub, because the solar project's actually in Lancashire. Am I right in thinking that, rather than to the Northeastern Yorkshire hub?
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's not been through this hub. Yeah.
Correct.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the solar farm that we're currently project managing and was likely to be commissioned this week, they also selected the BENCOM structure for theirs and are financing through community shares. And I think that the BENCOM is it's a relatively new structure, and it's been developed particularly to get round some of the administrative. It's a more simple form of governance to a full industrial provident society cooperative, and it gets around some of the challenges that around the rules of the registered societies having to trade with members. So a BENCOM can, for example, simply raise community shares, sell the power to the grid, and then distribute the profit according to its members, kind of object agreement and their kind of objects from the governance. So that's a way of doing it. There are examples of full registered societies developing solar projects. So I believe that Edinburgh Solar Cooperative is a full co-op. It has developed something like 26 different rooftop solar across Edinburgh, and so it's got lots of smaller individual projects that are then supplying predominantly council buildings, schools, but they've taken the full society approach. But there are greater administrative requirements, and there are specific rules that need to be met from the Financial Conduct Authority around that. Is anyone here? I think that most of the people on this call are early stage, but is anyone else on the call actually they're organized? So Anna or Andrew, what's the governance entity for Cairn?
That's a good question. Well, it's a, and I don't know what their terminology is, but we work Community Action Northumberland, and they're the lead on the project. So it's a project looking at how to help communities reduce their carbon.
Okay.
So we're actually a charity.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to input there. I mean, absolutely brand new to it, Alex. I haven't even had the strange role started actually while I was just off on leave, so I haven't had the full sort of briefing yet. But certainly, CAN is a charitable entity in its own right, and I know that we are on other projects. We're involved in all kinds of community-based projects. As to how the governance, I know we do an awful lot of work enabling these community setups to put the governance in place, but as to how that is actually made up, that's kind of really brand new to Anna and I. We haven't really got that stage yet, but I would imagine that the majority of it is certainly not for profit, but that's a bit of a guess as opposed to an informed response. Does that help?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's just about exploring things. So Mark, you have a question?
No, it wasn't a question. It's just that I used to work for an organisation that's similar to Anna and Andrew's in Yorkshire, and I sense that the project is enabling and building the capacity and capability of local people groups. It's quite different to what I've just described. But it may well enable projects which in turn may become PICs or community benefit societies. Don't know if that's helpful. Cheers.
Sure. Hilary?
As far as I understand the Cairn model, from what we're trying to roll out in Durham, I think it's a community benefit society where CAN and DCA take the risk, so they become the, I don't know what the terminology for it is, but they're the risk, the entity as such, which has to ultimately take the risk on things. And then there's a cooperative setup where all of the communities who have the sign an agreement become a member. Yeah, so a community cooperative. I think it's a full cooperative as far as I understand, and that's certainly the model that we're looking at for Durham. But other than that, I don't know much more about it.
If I may, I think so Hilary's talking about the NSAL project, so Northumberland Community Energy Limited, which I believe is what you're involved in helping. Yes. On that side. This is where so CAN have many different elements of what's going on, and that is the solar power community buildings project. So yeah, that's not one that I personally work on. So that's okay. Just another string to our bow, I suppose.
Right. So let me give an example of, I think I mentioned in the procurement discussion, the island and the concerns around supply chain. So for half a dozen years or more, we were working with the community on Iona, which is a tiny island of about 140 people off the coast of another island called Mull, which is off the coast, the west coast of Scotland. So it's quite remote, and there we were trying to develop, support the community to, well, firstly to decarbonize the whole island. And if I just talk briefly about the governance journey that they went on, it will touch on a number of the themes that we've been discussing already. So initially, the consultancy brief that we pitched for and won was tendered by a steering group of the community council. So like the parish council, they were unconstituted. The community council was the constituted body that was able to receive the funding that then paid for our services. But the actual client effectively was the steering group that was a subgroup of the community council. The community council themselves needed to sign off on the grant offer agreement that covered things. But then the day-to-day running of the project was delivered by that steering group. Now, as we went through the process and we identified that a heat network would be a great high-impact first phase for the island, they constituted a SCIO, which is it's a Scottish structure, but it's basically a parent charity. So it stands for Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organisation, and that provided a governance for this group to deliver the overall objectives of decarbonising the island. And that body was then able to secure further funding from different places to help develop and progress the project development stages. However, when it came to actually building and operating the heat network, the actual trading of energy, the supply of energy, was not deemed to be a charitable activity. And so there was a wholly owned trading subsidiary that was set up called Iona Energy Limited, which then was the governance vehicle for actually financing, building, and then operating the heat network on the island. And then that then had a contractual agreement with the parent charity whereby the profit that was generated by the limited company was transferred up to the charity for then meeting the charitable objects. But that whole process of identifying the right structure, constituting the bodies, and then kind of setting up the different parts took like maybe 2 or 3 years and some specialist legal advice. But they went through that process to identify the best structure for them. Now, if you go through the CEF process, the Community Energy Fund process, then one of the mandatory chapters of reporting that is required at the feasibility stage is something on governance. And so, you know, as part of the early stage feasibility, you know, kind of you and your specialist consultancy will be exploring the issues around, okay, what is the most appropriate governance vehicle for you and what you want to achieve. And that's where we come back to the kind of first 2 slides that I kind of presented, which were around making sure that you understand the relationships with the 2 stakeholders, with the various stakeholders, and also understand the specific roles that you want to fulfill as an organization. Because if you are providing energy efficiency advice to support and facilitate retrofit in your area, then you can do that as a charity. But if you want to be installing solar on the roof and supplying that solar to the people in their homes, then you need a different vehicle for that. You will need probably need some form of company structure, be that a community benefit company structure or a private limited company structure or another. So these are the kinds of things you need to explore, and there are benefits and disbenefits from each. And I think that, you know, kind of happy for people here to kind of raise further questions about what they want to do and explore that, you know, kind of in initial discussion right now, and benefit from the input of the others on this call as well. Let me just pick up. Anna, you had a question there. Would the type of governance developed as feasibility and business plans are worked through? So good, Anna, can you just explore that a bit, expand that a bit further?
Well, I'm just thinking, I know mine's all hypothetical, but if a community group, or a subsidiary of a community group come and say, we want to look at, I'm trying to think of all the projects earlier that you were involved in, panels on the roof to charge electric vehicles. Like if they've really got absolutely, the first question they've asked, they've got no experience within their group about how to progress it. I'm just wondering if it's more of an organic conversation with them, trying to work through what their aims are, would direct us down an avenue. Like, would it become a natural avenue to follow into a certain type of body? Governance body?
So there are some that would be eliminated as just not appropriate if you were following certain routes. So, you know, like I just said, if you were wanting to sell energy, then you would have to not go down a sort of charity route. But the other thing to kind of emphasize is that you don't need to have the final governance structure in place like until you need it, you know. So you could, you know, so for example, like just going back to that Iona, you know, example, they started out as a steering group. There was no entity. After a year and a half, they set up the charity, and they knew that they needed to set up the limited company in due course, but it wasn't until they had the finance in place to appoint the construction contractor that they actually needed to set up that limited company. You know, so they were able to operate and fund the development phases all through the charity, through the process without having that limited company set up. And actually setting up a limited company is very easy. You can do it in about 15 minutes and £30 and like online, you know, but that's at the point that you know what you're doing. So
yeah,
so
thank you. I think that was probably my question. Can it alter as you go through? Does it, or is it set in stone? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I think that you know, like Mark mentioned, it's like it is possible if you set up in a particular structure to change to a different structure along the way. And the other thing, I guess, that's quite important is if you're, say, you know, kind of a group for an area, and you're developing like sort of you're planning to develop sort of 4 or 5 big projects, that you might actually be well advised to set up a special purpose vehicle, so a separate governance entity for each of those major projects, so that in the event that one project runs into difficulties and has to be dissolved, it doesn't bring down the entire organization with it, you know. So you kind of ring fence structures and so on. And so it very much needs to be understood as like sort of a governance journey, where you start out, you have the structure in place that suits the purposes that you need to fulfill at the time, and then, you know, you can make decisions at as you go along to meet your future needs. So Ian, you've got your hand up.
I have, thank you. Yeah, I'm just a little bit confused. We're at the stage of not having an entity at the moment. We've got no governance at the moment because we haven't created anything. But if you don't have that entity in place, if you don't have your name, your logo, your brand as something that exists, how do you then apply for grants and funding and market yourself if you don't officially? You might have a group of people there with all the intentions and the ideas, but how do you apply for those grants, funds, finances if you don't officially exist?
So Sue, do you want to come in here?
Well, just say that, for example, if you're a new community group, you can partner up and work with, for example, a parish council or town council, and they in effect become your accountable body. So you work with them, and you maybe put together the project, write the application, but they will be the applicant for that fund. So they are the accountable body. They sign. They would do all the claims process, and the money would go into their bank account, and then through your agreement with them, it would come to you. So that's one way of approaching it, and that's something certainly for CEF funding is possible to do, and other funders as well. You know, some accountable bodies might be a county council or district council. So it's about having those relationships and some form of memorandum of agreement potentially. And then as your group develops, you might want to set yourself up. You know, you would probably want to set yourself up as your own accountable body, your own legal entity. Does that help?
Yeah, is that putting a layer of complexity by getting another body basically doing what you want to do? So would it be easier to actually get yourself set up as soon as possible? So you've got your own bank account, you've got your own partnerships. Is it more complicated if you? I mean, we want to set up as a body. We're going through the discussions, and we'll make that decision, I think, within the next 2-3 weeks or so. Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's worth pushing yourself to become that. I mean, we're probably going to go for the Community Benefit Society by the looks of it, to be decided. But would it be worth just getting that organised and doing it as much as we can ourselves, but obviously with the proviso that you're meeting and discussing with potential partners?
It really depends on you, your group, and what you're planning to do. I mean, the advantage of you know, partnering up with a parish council, for example, to do an initial, maybe small scale bid, is that could potentially fund your group to do that feasibility work to set yourself up. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to attract, you wouldn't be able to get grant funding because basically you haven't got a bank account, you're not an entity. So, you know, there are advantages, and I know some community development groups who have run themselves on quite a large scale through their parish council for many years. So it really depends on you, the group, but there are advantages to, you know, just setting off that way to get your startup.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Susan.
I mean, just to echo what Susan was just saying, we have clients from the CEF program that have done both. We've got ones that have like a good working relationship with the community council, the parish council. They have agreement from the parish council and the parish council receives the funding, but they run it. We've got an example of a group that did that, and then the parish council is getting cold feet once they see the terms of the contract and are a bit nervous about some of the clauses that say we have the right to claw back funding that we've granted, and they're like, well, hold on a minute. And even though that risk is, you know, that risk sits with the parish council, and therefore it's not the group itself that gets to make the decision. And then we've got another group that's like applied for and secured a grant in principle, but can't actually start the work because they haven't got everything in place, and they're, you know, held back by a month or two by the timing of like actually getting, you know, getting a bank account set up for a new entity can be a little bit of a process. So, you know, it really depends on kind of what relationship you have with another entity as to how quickly you need to set up for yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just add to that, that as Alex has said there, the parish council, it would still be your group delivering the project. You know, you would be doing the work, delivering the project. The parish council or your accountable body doesn't usually do that side of it for you. It's really the accounting and claims side, just to highlight that.
Okay,
John.
thank you very much. That's useful. Thank you.
Sue?
Sorry, me again, but I just wondered if it might be useful just to throw into the discussion the idea of a project with a group of organisations, basically an umbrella networking organisation has approached us. They've got a number of members. They've got they're all located in different buildings. So it's a diverse collection of buildings across the city. They know they want to do something community energy wise. They're not really sure what it might be yet, but things they're considering are, installing or securing funding for installing solar on the various different buildings, and then having some form of community energy agreement. It could be that they set up an organisation to literally fund and install those. It could be that each of those buildings are raising their own money to install, but then sharing the energy around the group or network. So that's one where they are very much asking the question now, right? They don't really know what they're doing. So I appreciate it's a bit difficult to give them advice, but they very keen to know what would their options be, you know, with this sort of diverse collection, and how might they look at going forward.
Do you want me to try and answer that right now?
Well, yeah, I just wondered if you had, you know, it was really just to pick your brains, any thoughts about sort of key considerations, really, I guess.
Yeah. So we're working with a development trust in a town called Carluke in southern Scotland, and they're trying to do a similar thing. In fact, we've recently got funding for it. It was just sort of made public yesterday, so I can share the details. So they're putting solar on 4 different roofs as a pilot, with a hope to be able to put solar on multiple further roofs across the town. And the approach they're taking is one around these would be community-owned assets. So the community would own the solar on the roof and be responsible for its maintenance, and it would sell the energy to the landlords, so the building owners, who would then benefit from cheaper electricity and a lease on their roof. So that's the model they're taking, but they are going to set up as a BENCOM so that the landlords, if you like, the building owners, can also become members of the entity that owns the asset. So they kind of are both a customer and a generator and supplier with different hats on. So there are, but I would kind of say that the ambition is to be able to share excess energy from one site to another, and have some form of kind of energy netting across the sites. But as it currently stands, that's not possible under current electricity regulations, unless everything sits behind the same meter. So there are some technical complexities and operation complexities, but in terms of like governance, there are also some decisions that influence the way you approach it and the way you can finance things. I mean, I just pick up on kind of one of the other models that was mentioned in the introduction that hasn't been discussed yet. So this is a community land trust, and I said, yeah, this is kind of a familiar model for certain communities when it comes to things like sort of building housing or other forms of built development or land ownership. But it's also been used for developing community energy projects. So I don't know if anyone on the call has heard of the heat network at Swaffham Prior, but it's one of the only heat networks that has been developed by a community. And Swaffham Prior heat network was developed as a partnership between the Swaffham Prior Community Land Trust as the community entity and Cambridgeshire County Council as the landowner and development partner. So the two of them came together and set up a joint vehicle in the form of the Swaffham Prior Heat Network to build and operate that, but the owners are the land trust on the one side for the community and the county council on the other for and that in that instance the position of the county council was critical in terms of being able to secure the funding because it opened up certain public sector procurement, public sector funding that wouldn't have been available to the community. And it also meant that certain kind of due diligence that was undertaken by the lender was met because it was the county council that was kind of on the books for the loan, as opposed to a land trust which didn't particularly have any other assets itself, and simply wouldn't have been able to borrow the multi-million-pound funding requirement necessary to actually develop out the project. So this is an example of a land trust being used for a community energy project, and also a kind of public-private partnership approach to share the risk to navigate that. Ian, you said you were all Woodley Community Energy, so that's not constituted right now, but you're minded to take the BENCOM route. Is that right? You're on mute. Sorry. You're muted.
Yeah. Yes, the BENCOM. That I presume that's the BS, the Community Benefit Society. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, we had a couple of meetings, and a couple of us were assigned to look into the different structures that we could take. So we've been doing that for about two weeks, looking at all the different societies, all of the different structures that they can take. And we've probably got two on the agenda to decide, which we've got a meeting next week, and that's the Community Benefit Society. We originally looked at the CIC, but it didn't seem to fit. We have spoken to a couple of locals with knowledge of some of this, and even one of the councillors suggested to look at the company limited by guarantee, which seemed another reasonable option. So I think it's boiled down to those two. The general feeling that we've put out to the members of the working group so far is the feeling is they would prefer to be a community benefit society, because it seems to give an image of cooperation rather than a company limited by guarantee, which sounds a bit more corporate. So yeah, to be decided, but after looking at everything, probably and lots of other, I mean, we found lots of other community energy companies have gone down that route, and it seems to be successful for them. So we can sort of tap on some of that knowledge by contacting people in other groups as well. So that's influenced us, but not decided yet. But it's been one of the influence factors. But it seems to work for lots of other community energy groups. So why complicate things? But it's not a final decision yet.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point that you've just made there, is that there are lots of options, and the process will identify some that aren't suitable, but it won't necessarily narrow it down to a single choice. There will always be some decisions that need to be made as to which way to go, and they will invariably come down to the values of the people who are wanting to take it forward. So you know, and I think it was you, Mark, that said, you know, one of the reasons you chose the BENCOM structure is you wanted to have that democratic ownership. And I think that, you know, certainly some of the co-ops that we've worked with, some of the BENCOMs that we've worked with, it's very much been a kind of this principle of collectiveness, democratic ownership that has been fundamental to that decision of going down that route. And you know, there's the principle of the co-op of like one member, one vote. So it's not like, okay, you know, kind of the board, you know, the control sits with like sort of a small kind of oligarchy of like people. You know, it's like, it's actually like sort of something that is truly collective, and that's something that kind of, I think, reflects the values of a lot of community organizations, and that's why it is a route that's commonly selected. Let me. Are there any specific questions around governance, or perhaps if not, then Mark, we could give you a chance to actually sort of discuss some procurement issues with the challenges you've got there.
I think one of the challenges that we've got at the moment is that the estimates for the cost of construction of the solar farm have increased significantly, and I think that's creating some anxiety for, you know, various partners and people who are associated with the project. So I'm just curious about strategies, you know, within other sort of solar farms that have been created for trying to raise people's awareness and understanding of risk and how it's managed. Yeah, our costs have effectively doubled over the period of 18 months. Yeah, cheers.
Okay. Have you gone to market yet? Have you done a tender process yet, or is it cost obtained by a cost surveyor or something like that?
The latter, yeah. The latter.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just before I get into discussion, Ian, do you want to just come in on that particular point?
Yeah, a general point, but a question to Mark. If costs have gone up so much and everything seems to be going, no matter what it is, seems to be going up, exponentially these days, and you've got a great idea and you think, yeah, we'll put some solar panels in, maybe get a farm going. Is there a point that you could possibly get to where you think the cost of this is just too much and there's going to be no benefit? It's going to cost so much to put this in, the price we'd have to charge to make it worthwhile just makes it unfeasible to do. I mean, is it possible to get to those points? Because the energy companies might be able to supply the energy cheaper than a community could supply. Is that a possibility, or will it always be the case that a community can supply energy cheaper than a supplier? I mean, there's the worry of that risk and that competition, isn't it? And the competition could be energy suppliers.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that the costs have increased significantly is that a significant proportion of the power, the energy generated, is being sold to a single company, and getting the energy supply to that single company is the challenging part, particularly in terms of the permissions and way leaves that are required. But we're talking about an initiative that's like 2 megawatts. So it's smaller than the other examples that have been used, but it's quite a challenging project. We have all sorts of consultants, access to consultants who are assisting us with the funding model and everything. I guess theoretically we could get to a point where we have to have a serious debate, but I think the thing is that as directors of a community benefit society, we're very mindful of our areas of expertise, and when we need to go to others for advice, and we're fortunate that we've got a group of specialists around us who can help us with that. But what we're always conscious of with the development of any project is taking people along with us in terms of the local community and other stakeholders, and we place great store by the story that we tell. And at the moment we've got some people who are sort of voicing concerns about why things have increased, and I think we've just got to put together a rationale for why things have changed. And I'm just curious, given that we're no longer in Europe, whether some of the other examples that have been described on this workshop have encountered similar challenges, and how they've responded to those. Thanks. Not sure that answers your question, Ian.
That's useful information and sort of insight from somebody that's obviously going down that route, started doing the procurement, engaging with the community, worried about the risks. So yeah, it's useful feedback. Thank you, Mark.
Sue?
I was just going to add, although I don't know, it's quite relevant, but in terms of the cost question that Ian said about it being worthwhile, just to also mention that as well as raising money by share offers or grants, etc., there is the loan side of things, and there are certain organisations that offer fixed rate and beneficial interest rates to community enterprises, as well as grants. So, you know, though, if you're an entity that's able to access loans, that is another way of looking at it, which I don't know, you'd obviously have to look at that in terms of the interest and your costs. But that might be a route to go down.
Yeah, so let me share some experiences. So firstly, I've been pleasantly surprised on a couple of projects recently where costs have gone in the other direction. So the Carluke project I mentioned earlier, the rooftop solar, community owned, we put a mini tender out for that in March 2022 and got 3 quotes back. We did another exercise in June this year, and the costs were about 10% less than the lowest quote last time round. Okay, now 2022 was, if you recall, shortly after the invasion of Ukraine. It was when the energy prices were going crazy. Brexit was still like kind of quite fresh. We were post-pandemic, the global supply chains. It was pretty much a very disastrous time where people would quote and, you know, 3 months later prices would have gone up again. And so I think there was a lot of like additional costs put in because of the risk that the contractors, the suppliers were putting in. And now, whilst there is still some inflation happening, it's less out of control than it was before, and so the level of risk that's being added, the risk premium that suppliers are putting in is lower. But also, and we've seen this on the large Dundee project, there was an global oversupply of solar panels, particularly coming out of China, and that has had a depressive effect on the price of panels, and so panels have actually become cheaper in the last 18 months rather than more expensive, and batteries are on the same downward trajectory. Now, one of the things that we made a decision of on, we as in collectively, like the project team, that we were going to be quite specific in terms of, if we were procuring panels from China, we were only going to be procuring them from manufacturers who were not at all associated with the human slavery supply chains. And so we needed to do some research around that to make sure that which panel suppliers we were picking weren't that. Now, that might not, everybody might not weigh that up, but once you raise it as a community entity, it's like, I think most people would say, yeah, you know what, we need to pay perhaps a little bit more in order to not be like sort of, you know, kind of contributing to the bad out there in the world, you know, in other parts of the world. But so that's the first thing, is to say, just Mark, there is a process of, if you test the market, the contractors will have a real position, you know, that may be different to your cost surveyors. Now, that's not to say your cost surveyors aren't doing a good job. It's just difficult to price, and you're always one step behind the market when you're doing that, you know. The other bit is that, you know, with permissions and way leaves, it's like, it's always that ends up being a negotiation between you and the landowner, you know, and the landowner might be like, oh, right, you know, you're there, you're going to be making a lot of money. If they try and extract too much money from it, there is a possibility they get nothing, you know. And there was a point in our Dundee project again where the quotes that came in particular, we had high again, that was a direct supply, but the direct supply required going underneath a trunk road, which was horizontal drilling. The transport regulator required us to build a a DMRB, Design Manual for Roads and Bridges level junction to access this solar farm. So that added about £300,000 of cost onto the cost of the solar farm. So these additional costs were specific to that particular project, and got to a position where it was like we needed to renegotiate with the off-taker to say, look, we need to charge you more for the energy, or this is not going ahead. And so similarly, when with negotiations with the landowners over way leaves, it's like you might just have to say, look, we're in this position. This isn't going to happen if you try and extract too much value. We need to renegotiate. And if they don't budge, then okay, the project's dead. But it's better is better for the project to die than you to build something that loses money. Because ultimately that's bad for the entire sector, not just for you, because it means that people put money in and then they don't get and it doesn't generate any community benefit and so on and so forth. So but then the other thing to be aware of is that there are potentially other sort of innovative models out there. There are plenty of operators that are interested in taking a shovel-ready project. Now, as a community entity that spent 4 or 5 or more years like developing a project, to then have to surrender it to a third party like at the last minute can be a painful thing, but it would mean that you actually do get something. So one of the contractors who tendered for the Dundee project, we got into discussions about them potentially financing the project themselves. And then it was a discussion of, okay, what's your community benefit package going to be, as opposed to it being owned by the community and then them having all the benefit, but then them also having all the risk associated with the financing, the loan repayments, and so on and so forth. So there are actually specific procurement routes that you can take for financing, or even for project buyback, where the company might build it and operate it, and then over the course of 5 or 10 years, the money that's the profit that's generated from the project is used to sort of like buy it back from the financer. And so and that in itself then influences questions around, do you go down a contract route that has a design, build, operate, maintain contract? Do you go down a design, finance, build, operate? Do you want to separate out the construction phase from the operation phase, and have a separate maintenance contract to the kind of construction contract? How are you going to configure that? And that's where kind of, but I would say that you don't necessarily need to have made those decisions at the time when you go to market. So you can put a specification together, like a tender specification that says, this is what we want to build, so very precisely, okay, it's this is the land area, this is the capacity, this is the electrical infrastructure, this is the route, this is the kind of the connection requirements, etc. And then let the individual contractors decide, okay, which panels they're going to provide, which equipment, how they're going to do it, what that total cost would be. And then you can get into discussion about, okay, which form of contract are we going to use? Are we going to use like the NEC4 template? Are we going to use something else? Are we going to get a bespoke template written up? And then once you've got a cost, you get into a negotiated position with the bidder, and you can then say, okay, we can't afford to do that. What about a 1.8 megawatt project? We can afford to finance that. How much of a saving does that deliver? And you get to a position where, okay, I think we've got a project that we can take forward. So that, for example, the Dundee again one, just that we tendered for a 2 megawatt project. In between the time of doing that and the design and the consents and so on, panel performance had improved such that instead of like 440 watt panels, like everybody was tendering with 500, 550, 600 watt panels. That meant for the similar development area, you could get an extra 20% of capacity. So we ended up developing a 2.6 megawatt solar farm on the same development footprint that we had planning consent for a 2 megawatt scheme. So there are things that you can do like during and sort of the procurement process. And that's why identifying the right contractor to work with who can kind of value engineer what approach they're going to take to sort of any cost increases or even cost savings, how they're going to be apportioned and so on. Are really things that you can actually get into the real detail of, like sort of as you work through, but always with the right project team, you can find a solution.
That's great. Thanks very much, Alex. If I can just sort of mention just a couple of things, which may well relate to the broader group's experience beyond using this particular project as an example. First is that I can relate to what you're saying about ethical solar panels, because I'm also a charity trustee of a foundation that funds energy projects, and we've insisted that ethical panels are used. Now, that's really difficult because it's not a particularly transparent sort of supply chain. You're smiling, I'm sure you've experienced that. And the other thing is, in terms of procurement, I think I mentioned this at a previous workshop, as a volunteer at the organic farm, I've been to visit a number of community solar projects and other renewable projects. And there is this common denominator about the importance of doing due diligence on using contractors, even on small scale projects like community buildings, village halls, golf clubs, etc. Because there is a pattern of some of those people going out of business, and then the community organisations being left, a bit high and dry. So the people that I visited have said that next time round they'd be really sort of quite careful. They've chosen to use local, in line with their values, but they said they would do a lot more due diligence. So some of the guidance that you were giving in the earlier slides, I think, is very appropriate, regardless of whether it's small, medium, or large scale, and can only help reduce the stress levels and increase the enjoyment levels of being involved in renewable projects.
Yes, I mean, having worked with contractors who are collaborators on the project and work with contractors who are nothing but a headache, tell you that the difference is chalk and cheese, and it makes the difference between a project being enjoyable to deliver and it being a complete nightmare. And you might get the same end result, but the process is it's quite involved. It can take in some time, and stress levels. You just sort of wonder what you're getting yourself in for. And just before I bring Ian in there, I think that question around due diligence unfortunately applies a lot in the retrofit market. If you look at a lot of companies that are servicing the retrofit, particularly the domestic retrofit market, if you go into a company's house, you can do a quick quick look, and you can see these companies. It's like they set up, they trade for a year and they dissolve, and they set up, they trade for a year and they dissolve, and it's like, why are they doing that? It's like you have to, you know, as part, there might be a legitimate reason for it, but there might not be. It might just be like dodgy trading practices. By dissolving, they remove liabilities on the company, the 6-year warranties that are on installation equipment or something, and it's like your protection can be lost, and therefore, you know, even for, you know, I agree, even for small projects, it might seem like, oh, this is quite a lot of work, but actually, it's like getting contracts drawn up. It's like, you know, kind of, we spent an enormous length of time like getting contracts drawn up by two parties who basically agreed, and it's like it felt like overkill, but actually it is only if things go wrong, you need those contracts to be in place. It's like same with like due diligence. It's like most of the time, hopefully you'll never need that, you know, to have done that. But it's where it's if you haven't, and then you go, oh, right, I should have done that. And then, you know, forewarned is forearmed. Ian?
Yeah, what happens then if a contractor does go bust? Where does the liability lie there? Do you build that into your contracts somewhere? Is it insurance? You could be left high and dry, couldn't you?
Yeah, so that's where, you know, you need to make sure that your contracts are well written. It has a lot to do with the way the project's managed and the payment schedules. So if a contractor goes bust, it's like, have you paid them for things that they haven't delivered? You know, that's when you can become exposed as an organization. You know, it's like, are you liable for costs from their suppliers? You know, so, you know, did you order things directly, or did the contractor order them, and so on. So for example, you know, you might make cost savings by appointing a contractor directly to build the access junction, and then appointing a different contractor to build your solar farm, because the likelihood is that it'll be an electrical contractor that does a solar farm, whereas it'll be a civils contractor that does a road junction. But if you go down that procurement route, let's say your civils contractor is delayed, or, you know, they're taking 2 weeks, then you could face penalties from your solar contractor because they can't get on site to do their work. So they've got a whole squad of people who can't do it because of a contract that you've direct appointed on, you know, or, you know, and so you're liable for that. Whereas if it's all done under a single main contract, it's like, it's the main contractor that takes that risk. So this question of risk sort of rests sort of all the way through the process. You know, maybe it's cheaper for you to buy the transformer directly from the manufacturer and have that shipped to site. But what if there's a delay on that transformer coming in, and then commissioning, and then you have to bring a squad back, a team back to actually do that. So there's always a balance between kind of control and risk and cost.
Thanks,
Mark?
Alex.
Alex, I'm not sure you answered Ian's question, because I think you were asking about how you can sort of try to mitigate the financial risk if you're on a small project. You know, what is the role of contingency? I'm just looking to Northumberland and other colleagues at the moment as well who've supported, you know, lots of community building type projects. How have you sort of navigated this side of things? Thanks.
I'm not actually sure on that. I'm trying to think what that is and what the plan is on the risk. I think it's all insurance. They take insurance out to cover the risks within the cooperative. And as mentioned before, they've really gone down the strict procurement route. They did have a supplier that did go bust, Sentinel, I think they were called. And they had to manage that, but that was after a really quite a thorough procurement process. As we know, they're all, there's been a lot of issues with companies going out of business quite rapidly. So yeah, I think it's just the level of insurance that they're taking out, as far as I understand the model at this stage. Just being diligent, really.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on that, I think there's things that you can do directly. So there's the due diligence that you do. There's then the contract to make sure that you've got as much security as you can over things. There's the way you structure payments and assets. So it's like, say, do they go bust? It's like the solar panels that were bought and paid for by you are passed to your ownership, rather than become part of the general mix of assets that are owned by the company that potentially are up for grabs for all the receivers. And then like sort of the backstop, the insurance is the backstop, but there's all the steps that you need to take kind of up that, so that before that, so that the insurance is the last thing, because insurance is an extra cost, and the insurer themselves will look at what at these same things. They'll do their own due diligence, and they'll come to their own view on risk, and if they think it's risky, then either you won't get insurance or your insurance will be high. So yeah, these are the kinds of things that you need to consider. I'm aware we're coming up to 12 o'clock. Sue.
Yeah, sorry, no, it's just to go back to your innovative models about the sort of the companies actually taking on the development installation of projects. Just something be good to have your thoughts on, in terms of that sort of shared ownership model, for example, where a community group may have done some initial work, but really don't have the capacity to develop a community energy. So are perhaps looking at pairing up with an energy installer, developer, maybe, I don't know, to do solar or wind or something, where in effect the energy developer would actually take on doing the development work. So the legislation and the permissions and all PPAs, etc. But then there would be some form of built-in community benefit, working with the community group or the landowner together, or whatever, and just how a new group might go about looking at developing that kind of projects, where they could get advice about building in community benefit, and really sort of, any big red flags that you might have come across in your experience of groups looking at that kind of thing, but particularly where they get advice. How do they progress? Do they look at more than one energy installer?
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's two kind of ways of approaching this, and both have quite a long track records. First is the developer-led approach. And this has happened a lot for onshore wind in Scotland, where developer wants to build a wind farm, recognize that the community might not be so keen on it, offer up a community share in it, and then there becomes a kind of partnership between the developer as the senior partner and the community as a part owner. And there's a lot of materials and experience being developed from that, and particularly in Scotland, with Scottish Government introducing best practice guidance, and it's recommendations on shared ownership as well. So it's actually quite common for communities to be offered a share of wind farm development in Scotland. And there are some materials, and we can perhaps add some links to that on the slides that we send out. Reece, if you could just take a note of that. So these are sort of guidance documents that, you know, whilst they're prepared by Scottish Government, the principles generally apply kind of consistently, you know, to any kind of community project. The other way is community-led, where the community is the one that's like sort of come up with a project idea. It's the one that's taken it through the development process, got the planning permissions, got the various consents, and then perhaps at the point of financing realizes, or always knew, that it's like it's not able to actually raise the funds necessary to develop. And in that instance, it's a much more bespoke process that's necessary. As in, what you need to do is identify a partner who is willing to take on that role of develop and financing the project, and then getting into a negotiation on, okay, what is the value of the contribution that the community's already brought from getting it to the stage that it has, and what is the ongoing involvement that the community would have, as in, would the community continue and put some of the finance in, or would it be wholly developed by the private partner, or would it be developed by the private partner, but perhaps over a period of time through the profit from the energy pass from private ownership to community ownership? So there are a number of different approaches that can be taken, and that would need to be like sort of modeled financially, and that would depend on the risk appetite and the ability to raise finance, and all kinds of sort of project specific considerations. But it shouldn't be seen as like a kind of, you know, in many respects, it makes sense to partner with a private developer on these kinds of things. It's like our community energy clients, often they'll develop one project, and then they'll have a project, and they will use the income from that project to do other things within their community, you know. So it's like if you build a house, it's like if you go and build a house, then you've got experience of building one house, you know, whereas a house builder has experience of building it, you know, all the time, so they know all of that. So it's like it makes sense in some respects to partner with a developer who's got the experience, got the contacts, got the networks, and be able to deliver, you know, because there are always things that need to be done that you don't necessarily know need to be done. And if you don't know they need to be done, then you find out you need them doing, and then it adds to delay, and then delay adds to cost, and the cost is difficult to manage from a you know, kind of, particularly if you're going down a community share race route where you finance the thing up front. You don't necessarily have contingency to cover all those additional costs. So I think that the other point you mentioned, Sue, was then about kind of how do you find the right partner? Well, it comes back to that same process of procurement. It's like, how do you make the opportunity as widely known as possible? How do you then assess the submissions that you receive in relation to it? And then how do you identify preferred bidder, and then how do you negotiate a final position? So it's the same processes of like, what are the criteria, what's the process, what's important to you as a group, and then, you know, how do you kind of reach a final agreed position where everybody feels they're getting a fair return for what they're putting in.
Alex, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. And just in terms of guidance, who a group might go to get some sort of hand-holding guidance in terms of having those negotiations, or what they should be looking for. Obviously, if they've not gone through the process before, any top tips where people might look to for that sort of advice?
So that's where I think like by the time you get to that process, you will have gone through a feasibility of detailed project development. You'll have like scars from like having gone through the planning and regulatory processes. You'll have built up experience yourself, but you will also have built up a professional network of people who have supported you along that way. And whilst different people are skilled at different stages of the process, there are those that have experience of doing that and representing. So there are companies like ourselves who would be able to like sort of act as the client's representative in negotiations. There are also sort of legal firms who the lawyers themselves, or the solicitors, would be able to like sort of be supporting of a community group in that. And so what I would say is that you don't really want to be finding a partner at that late stage who you've not worked with already, who would be doing that negotiation with you. You would want to, through the process, have like sort of built up a good working relationship with somebody who you can trust to like sort of be negotiating either with you or on your behalf on that, and who's got enough experience to know how to, you know, what's a fair deal, if you like. And because ultimately, and I think this is probably a kind of good takeaway from this, is that what really matters is, you know, that everybody who's involved has a sense of like they're getting something out from it. So it's not about getting, you know, kind of hammering down the contractor to the lowest price you can possibly squeeze them, because then they're not going to put the effort in to like sort of do a good job for you. It's like, but if they feel they're getting a fair price for what they're doing, they'll do a good job. You know, it's like same with everybody you're working with. If you're supplying energy to somebody, you don't want to make the maximum profit you possibly can, because, you know, then they might be like actually like not that vested in like sort of kind of sticking to that deal. And when it comes to it, they'll maybe say, you know what, when it comes to signing on the dotted, we're not that, it's just not that great a deal for us, you know. And they'd be like, you put all that effort in. So if you treat it as like, well, how would you like to be treated yourself, and treat it kind of in that ethical manner, it's like, well, then you can identify partners and people along the journey who can support that process and get to the end result that everybody's looking for, where they're happy, you're happy, you know, everybody walks away, like shakes hands, and it's like, okay, great, good job. And I think that's ultimately like you can wrap everything up in in governance and legal structures and procurement and contracts and so on. But ultimately, it's like people dealing with each other, and like how you do that is like, you know, kind of the reflection on whether or not it's going to be a positive and constructive process, or if it's going to be a challenging and difficult one.
Terrific, thank you. Really helpful.
Good. So we've kind of segued straight from a roundtable discussion into that. We don't really have questions and answers, but I just maybe use this sort of final section of the morning to like sort of give the opportunity for anyone to like sort of raise any other points before we kind of try and wrap things up. So Leanne.
Hi, sorry, I'm just kind of thinking about taking the conversation on further. One of the earlier meetings, I suggested like some kind of Facebook group or network to keep up the conversation between groups that are starting up so people can share information. I'm really interested in hearing where everybody else is at with projects. I'm so early on in the situation, the stage. But I think it's valuable talking to people. I've had a few emails going around. I just thought like possibly a WhatsApp group, but I just wanted to add my email address there if anybody wants to get back in touch. Yeah, there's so much going around in my head at the moment. I don't know where to start, but it's just a case of keeping on going. And, you know, I'm hoping to find projects to work with. I'm talking to some people in our area. And I think there's so many possibilities, and it's just about getting stuck in and starting, really, I think. I just want to get stuck in and really begin the process with some groups. There's a lot of community groups around here I think can benefit from community energy because their groups are struggling to get community engagement, and if they go down the community energy route, even just a small amount, a few panels on the roof to help them save money on their bills, and then they can develop that project as part of what they're doing. It brings the community in. So I'm kind of looking down those routes to try and see how many projects we can get involved in. Just getting off the ground with one, hopefully. That's what I want to do at the moment.
Thanks, Leanne. Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just in support of what you've described, Leanne, I'd just asked the question about what already exists. And I know that in like North Yorkshire, I appreciate you may not be in North Yorkshire, but the Rural Community Council here, which is Community First Yorkshire, they have like a closed Facebook group for community buildings, and there's quite a few sort of energy related conversations going on there. So that's like peer-to-peer support, but I'm conscious that in other localities there will be sort of similar networks, and I guess it links back to what you were saying earlier, Alex, about any of us not knowing what we don't know. But I'm just looking to sort of Susan and the Zero Hub just to ask what's the hub's sort of take on peer-to-peer networks, and do you have anything that Leanne and others could key into? Thanks.
The looking at the forum side of things was something that was an action plan point for our steering group. So they looked into this. particularly in relation to what other forums and groups are already out there. And there are quite a number already out there. And that's something that I'd always encourage people to plug into. So, for example, there's North Yorkshire Climate Coalition, there's various environmental groups, sustainability groups. So I think I'd always suggest that people try and find out what their local ones are, and that's where I may be able to help, because I'm collating that list of, you know, what groups, what forums are out there. So hopefully can point in a direction. We can hopefully link groups up with others for a bit of peer-to-peer support, introductory conversations. That's currently on an informal basis. But so yeah, both of those sides really. But it's about not trying to reinvent the wheel when those groups are already out there, but make sure the linkages exist. I hope that's helped. But do come to me, or in fact, obviously, where people are in other hub areas, they go to their community energy team with any queries, and we may be able to link you up with somebody locally. And we've been doing that in the different parts of northeastern Yorkshire to have a conversation, just to share experiences.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think Community Energy England is also a great resource. It's got, you know, for peer-to-peer learning, and I think it's always really kind of, it's often the best way of actually finding out things is just like, okay, here's somebody who's done it already, and this is our experience, and then you can learn from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot what I was going to say now. Yeah, I'm looking into anybody who's doing anything around here. As I say, I was involved with networks back 10 years ago, so things have changed. People have moved on. Trying to re-engage with people again. I still feel like there needs to be somebody pulling stuff together in my particular region. And I've been looking out for somebody else to do this and see who else is doing it. And I don't see it, but I see little groups that I can talk to through previous contacts and stuff like that. But yeah, all your suggestions, very useful. I'll hopefully have a conversation with you, Susan, very shortly. And we'll take on from there. But yeah, thank you again.
Just also to add to what Alex said there quite rightly about Community Energy England as a brilliant starting point. Also to say case studies in other case studies which Community Energy England have, and we're also developing our 8 video case studies, of which Mark and Growing with Grace are one of them. So those will be on the website. So that, in terms of the sort of peer-to-peer support, mentoring as a starting point, is also very useful.
Good. Well, I think it just leaves me to thank everybody for attending not just this workshop, but the others that we've facilitated, and thanking Sue and the others at the Hub for actually facilitating this and setting them up and so on. I don't know, Rhys or Ross, do you have any kind of closing remarks?
I mean, nothing in particular, but just to mention that we've kind of really taken over the course of the 4 workshops along that full project journey. So kind of starting with a kind of more options appraisal, what are your energy technologies, onward through kind of how to develop the project, kind of looking at your net zero development options, feasibility studies, onto designing the business case and commercial case, and now today with the procurement. And just to say that after this session is finished, we'll be sending on all the slides from all 4 workshops, and I believe the recordings will become available as well. So if there are any of those individual workshops or any of those stages of the process that you'd be interested in, and didn't get the chance to go to the workshop, the resources and hopefully the recording will become available to you. So I point you in that direction. And just to thank you for heard back from the 2 workshops I wasn't attending, then the 2 that I have been, the kind of engagement level has been great. Really, I've been glad to hear your questions and glad to hear what's going on in the Northeast. Really quite exciting to have you all on kind of at different stages of project development, and I'm excited to see what comes next. And as Sandy said after his presentations, I think Alex would say the same. Feel free to contact us if you've got any project-specific queries. Yeah, hopefully see you again soon.
And Sue?
Just really to thank Scene for delivering and the whole team for delivering these series of workshops. And, you know, I think they've been incredibly, well, hopefully they've been incredibly useful to people and raised questions and been thought-provoking as well. And also very much to thank everybody for their contributions again to making, you know, to questions and inputting into the workshops. And just to remind everyone that in the new year, we will be having surgeries, one-to-one surgeries on these same topics. So low carbon technologies, net zero project development and planning, commercial case development, and the governance and procurement. So same as these, but it's basically an hour of a one-to-one opportunity to get guidance about your particular questions. So do keep an eye out on our events page and the community energy page, which I'll put the link in the chat. But just thank you again to Scene.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and then have a nice rest of the day.
Many thanks. Goodbye.
Thanks very
Thank you.
much. Yeah.
Thanks very much,
Bye.
everyone.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.